Our lesson for today is all about proving statements on triangle congruence. From our previous lesson on triangle congruence, we learned that the two triangles are congruent if the three pairs of corresponding sides have equal lengths and the three pairs of corresponding angles have equal measures. However, applying SSS postulate, SAS postulate, ASA postulate, AAS theorem, and HL theorem, we can also prove that the two triangles are congruent. And when two triangles are congruent, we can conclude that the remaining corresponding sides and angles are congruent, since corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, or also known as CPCTC. The following examples on this lesson will help us to prove statements on triangle congruence. For our first example, the given is line segment AB is congruent to line segment ED, and line segment BC is congruent to line segment DC, and line segment AC is congruent to line segment EC. So let's prove that angle BAC is congruent to angle DEC. So we have our first column, which is the statements, and for the second column are the reasons. For our first statement, we have line segment AB is congruent to line segment ED, and the reason is given. For our second statement, line segment BC is congruent to line segment DC, and the reason here is also given. For our third statement, we have line segment AC is congruent to line segment EC, and the reason again is given. And for our fourth statement, we have triangle ABC is congruent to triangle EDC, and the reason here is according to SSS postulate. And for our last statement, we have angle BAC is congruent to angle DEC, and the reason here is that is the corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, or also known as the CPCTC. If we analyze this, we can prove that angle BAC is congruent to angle DEC. If you already proved that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle EDC, it is already given that line segment AB is congruent to line segment ED. Line segment BC is congruent to line segment DC, and line segment AC is congruent to line segment EC. Marking the necessary sides shows that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle EDC by SSS postulate. Since the two triangles are congruent, angle BAC is congruent to angle DEC by corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, or also known as the CPCTC. Next, for our second example, the given here is line segment OB is perpendicular to line segment RI, and B is the midpoint of line segment RI. So let's prove that line segment RO is congruent to line segment IO. So we have 8 statements here and 8 reasons. So for our proof, for our first statement, B is the midpoint of line segment RI, and the reason here is given. Second, for our second statement, line segment RB is congruent to line segment IB, and the reason here is the definition of midpoint. For our third statement, line segment OB is perpendicular to line segment RI, and the reason here is given. For our fourth statement, we have angle RBO and angle IBO are right angles, and the reason here is perpendicular lines form right angles. And for our fifth statement, we have angle RBO is congruent to angle IBO. The reason is all right angles are congruent. Next, for our sixth statement, line segment BO is congruent to line segment BO, and that is reflexive property. For our seventh statement, triangle RBO is congruent to triangle IBO, and the reason here is by SAS postulate. And for our last statement, which is the one who we need to prove, we have line segment RO is congruent to line segment IO, and the reason here is the CPC-TC. So if we analyze this, or for our analysis, it is given that B is the midpoint of line segment RI. As we know, midpoint divides segments into two congruent parts. Thus, line segment RB is congruent to line segment IB by the definition of midpoint. It is also given that line segment OB is perpendicular to line segment RI, and perpendicular segments form a 90 degrees angle. Thus, angle RBO is congruent to angle IBO because all right angles are congruent. By reflexive property, line segment BO is congruent to line segment BO. This means that triangle RBO is congruent to triangle IBO by SAS postulate, and line segment RO is congruent to line segment IO by corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Next, for our third example, the given here is line segment OH is parallel to line segment EM, and angle EHM is congruent to angle OMH. So let's prove that line segment EH is congruent to line segment OM. So we have here 6 statements. For our first statement, we have angle EHM is congruent to angle OMH. The reason, that is our given. Next, we have line segment HM is congruent to line segment HM. The reason, reflexive property. For our third statement, we have line segment OH is parallel to line segment EM. The reason here is also given. And for our fourth statement, we have angle OHM is congruent to angle EMH. And the reason here is alternate interior angles are congruent. For our fifth statement, we have triangle EMH is congruent to triangle OHM. And the reason here is by ASA postulate. And for our last statement, we have line segment EH is congruent to line segment OM by CPC-TC. For our analysis, it is given that angle EHM is congruent to angle OMH. The common sides, or the common side, which is line segment HM, or of both triangles, can be proved as line segment HM is congruent to line segment HM by the reflexive property of congruency. Next, line segment OH is parallel to line segment EM. And we know that if parallel lines cut by a transversal, then the alternate interior angles are congruent. And that is angle OHM is congruent to angle EMH by alternate interior angles. This means that triangle EMH is congruent to triangle OHM by ASA postulate, and line segment EH is congruent to line segment OM by CPC-TC. Now, for our last example, the given here is line segment SI is perpendicular to line segment AP, and line segment AR is perpendicular to line segment SP. Another given, we have line segment AR is congruent to line segment SI. Let's prove that line segment PR is congruent to line segment PI. Given the illustration on the slide, let's proceed to our statements and reasons. For our first statement, we have line segment SI is perpendicular to line segment AP, and line segment AR is perpendicular to line segment SP. And our reason here is our given. For our second statement, we have angle PRA and angle PIS are right angles. The reason here is the definition of perpendicular lines. For our third statement, we have angle PRA is congruent to angle PIS. And the reason? All right angles are congruent. For our fourth statement, we have angle APR is congruent to angle SPI. And the reason? That is the reflexive property. For our fifth statement, we have line segment AR is congruent to line segment SI. The reason? This is again our given. For our sixth statement, we have triangle PRA is congruent to triangle PIS. That is by AAS theorem. And for our last statement, that is not 6, that is 7. For our seventh statement, we have line segment PR is congruent to line segment PI. That is by CPC-TC. For our analysis, it is given that line segment SI is perpendicular to line segment AP, and line segment AR is perpendicular to line segment SP. We know that perpendicular lines form a right angle, and all right angles are congruent. Since angle PRA and angle PIS are right angles, then angle PRA is congruent to angle PIS. The common angle from both triangles can be proved as angle APR is congruent to angle SPI by reflexive property of congruent triangles. And the non-included sides here are the line segment AR and line segment SI, and they are congruent. So therefore, we have line segment AR is congruent to line segment SI. This means that triangle PRA is congruent to triangle PIS by AAS theorem, and line segment PR is congruent to line segment PI by CPC-TC. So, that is our lesson for today, which is proving statements on triangle congruence. I hope you understand our lesson for today. Thank you for watching.